Courtney Johnson Rose, Chair of the Board, honored to serve, and want to welcome you all to Monday Morning Momentum. We're excited about June. I can't believe it's June. We're halfway through the year. So hopefully you're accomplishing the things that you want to accomplish for your chamber. We have chambers from across the state represented here, and very excited about our guest speaker. We're also represented internationally. So we are all the way from Fort Worth to Jamaica this morning. So very excited about that. We have a very special presentation this morning from Jessica Whittington. She's the founder and principal of LC Resources. She works with impact-driven organizations to improve and demonstrate their outcomes and demonstrate their ability to uphold their commitments, inspire brand trust, and expand their impact. Jessica focuses on organizations that advance economic opportunity for minorities and women through entrepreneurship, homeownership, financial literacy, and education and training. That sounds like all of our chambers. She has worked with minority and women-owned business development for approximately 3 years. She believes the best approach to achieving economic equality for those communities is to accelerate the success of the organizations that support them. She holds a Bachelor's of Arts in Political Science, a Master's of Public Administration, and a Postmaster Certificate in Program Evaluation. She is also a Certified Associate of Project Management. She has over 8 years of experience coordinating government, healthcare, and nonprofit programs, projects, and executives. Her contributions include data collection and management, system transformation, process and system improvement, effective program design and management, and robust data management and analysis. Jessica has 2 daughters and has been married for 11 years, most importantly. And she enjoys genealogy research and has taken professional genealogical training in her leisure time. We are very blessed, you all, to have Jessica with us with some important information to share of how we take our chambers to the next level. 2022 is about going to the next level. So we're very proud and happy to have Jessica here to share with us. I do want this to be interactive. So Jessica, if you are okay with just kind of allowing us to ask questions as we go, if something hits your spirit and you need to know a little bit more, need to dig a little deeper, I would love for this to be interactive for us. And of course, we'll have questions and answers at the end also too. So Jessica, I will turn it over to you, and thank you so much for joining us and wanting to share with TAC on this wonderful Monday morning.
Well, thank you so much, Courtney, for that introduction. It is certainly my pleasure to be here with you all to share this presentation. Let me get it up here and just let me know if you all can see that.
We can see it.
Good. So yeah, I'm excited today to talk about how to inspire brand trust by measuring outcomes to demonstrate your impact, right? And so before I start, I want to just kind of take a moment to look at this quote. I actually found this quote a while back, and I thought it was so fitting that I'm here today speaking with you all. But I absolutely agree with his position here, and I think it aligns a lot with what Courtney just mentioned, right? That a lot of my work is around advancing the opportunities for minority and women, and I do believe that the best way to do it is to accelerate the support of the organizations that support them. So let's hop right into, I want to first talk about how outcomes differ from outputs, right? So outputs consist of quantitative data from activity, right? So it's the 300 people attended our workshop, right? We served 3,000 businesses in 2001, right? Whereas outcomes are qualitative and quantitative data that demonstrates the results of your activity. So 50% of members increased their revenue after joining the chamber. 75% of members increased their business connections after joining the chamber, right? So there's very big distinction. And I started here because this is often where we tend to kind of mesh the two a little bit, right? And we sometimes report outcomes. We sometimes report outputs as outcomes instead of really focusing on the results of that activity, right? which are what outcomes are. So the way to think about it is like outcomes are the results of achieving your goal, right? And we'll dig a little deeper in that. So let's take a look at this graph. And what I did here was I kind of created this problem, right? And that's a false stat. But if our problem that we were solving for is that Black businesses earn 40% less revenue than white businesses in the same industry, right? Then let's say we had a goal to connect Black businesses to resources and opportunities to achieve revenue parity. So essentially what we're doing here is we have a problem, we have a goal, and now we're going to look at how we're going to actually get to that, to achieving that goal, right? And creating that impact that we're looking for. So first we're looking at, and I'm sorry, I'm trying to move my box around. Oops, hold on. Sorry about that. I was trying to move my box around and it went off. Okay. So first we're looking at inputs, right? So what do we use to do the work? So it could be financial, right? You're submitting capital, you're providing the capital, you're providing human resources, you have staff and so forth, right? Physical, you're developing curriculums, maybe if you have workshops or programs. There's knowledge, right? There's best practices. There's all of these things that you all are adding value and contributing to what you all are doing in order to achieve your goals. And then the next thing is what we do, right? So that's activities. And that's going to be your training workshops, your one-on-one sessions, right? Your technical assistance sessions. Those are the activities that you all are doing in order to achieve your goals, right? And then from those activities, you have outputs. And so that's why we call them activity data, right? Because from those activities, you have 300 people attended our workshop, right? So the stats we just looked at, we serve 3,000 businesses, right? Or 50% of men and 50% of women. But then from those outputs, you have outcomes. And that's where what we're hoping to achieve, that's where we see that, right? We see that in the outcomes. And then from the outcomes, we have impacts. We have impact, right? And that impact is to decrease the revenue gap in this example, right? So let's say if our ultimate impact was to decrease the revenue gap, right? So what's important here to notice is you can't really have impact without outcomes. It's really the way it works, right? You really have to think about the outcomes that you all are achieving in your organizations and for your members in order for you to really have impact, right? And I'm going to stop for a second and just see if there's any questions so far where I am, just to see if I can maybe answer any questions. And if not, I can keep going here.
Questions, anyone? Okay, so far so good.
Okay. All right. All right, so focus on outcomes over outputs, right? Why? Because outcomes are better indicators of effectiveness, right? So we just talked about this, looking at the fact that it's showing the change in behavior or state for your members, right? As a result of joining the chamber. So they indicate effectiveness. They're what supporters expect from your organization, right? So when people sign up, when businesses sign up and members join, they're looking for outcomes, right? They're expecting something in return for their membership. And that's usually going to be outcomes, right? And 3, they help you achieve your mission. So going back to that example, if I use LC for an example, my mission is to help accelerate the success of impact-driven organizations. If I focused on outputs, I really wouldn't know if I'm achieving that, right? If I only focused on, I had 5,000, or I had, 5,000 clients would be fantastic. But if I had, 50 clients last year, or I had, so many workshops last year, right? That really doesn't tell me much about if I'm achieving that mission, right? But that's what outcomes do. Outcomes help you determine whether or not you're achieving your mission. And then they help you improve your organization and services. So when you look at your outcomes, there's 2 things that typically happen, right? You have these great outcomes, you're able to demonstrate what you're doing, and you're now able to say like, wow, what we're doing really works, right? The workshop, the sessions, the programs, they work. So maybe we can look at other programs or other activity that is not that's not producing the same outcomes rather, right? And use what you've learned from that to improve your services, right? And also, let's say you don't have any outcomes. Let's say you start, you're measuring outcomes and you find that you don't have any. So then it allows you again to improve your organization and services. All right. So now let's look at how to measure outcomes, right? And the first thing I want to start with is you want to definitely try to measure current outcomes. So I don't know if anyone is thinking like, maybe I don't have any real outcomes right now, right? Maybe there's nothing I can really show or produce at this moment. I would encourage you to try to measure them, because the data shows us that 70% of organizations cannot demonstrate outcomes, but it doesn't mean you don't have any, right? It's that it's demonstrating outcomes that's often a challenge for organizations. So I would encourage you, what I do at LC is an evaluability assessment. So essentially it's looking at your current data to identify whether or not you have enough, right? You have enough data that exists in order to do what we would call like an outcome evaluation. But essentially, do you have enough to actually measure outcomes? And if you don't, it's okay, right? Because you're going to now design for outcomes. So I recommend that you should always design for outcomes, right? And we'll get a little bit more into what that means, but essentially you should know what you want to achieve, and then you should be designing your programs and your strategies around that. And so just a few important pieces about outcomes, right? Outcomes are short-term, they're intermediate, and they're long-term. So short-term outcomes are typically going to be a change in knowledge and awareness. That's always the first outcome to come, right? That's the first outcome you see, rather. You're going to change someone's knowledge and awareness around whether it's financial management or financial documents, right? Or networking in the business community. You first change their awareness and their knowledge. And then second, you change their behavior. That's intermediate. As you start watching some of those changes happen in their behavior. And then long term is going to be more or less a change in state, right? So it's a change in, have I increased their revenue, right? Have I increased their business connections or things like that? It's long-term outcomes. And outcomes are both expected and unexpected. So again, we're going to plan for outcomes as much as possible, but you may end up having outcomes that you didn't realize, right? And that's always, you know, that's the reality of any program. And they're also both negative and positive. So again, it's a feature, or it's the way outcomes work, right? And then you want to make sure when you're measuring outcomes that you have a robust but simple data collection system, right? Management, and a system used to basically analyze your data as well. And I've used tools that are very low learning curve, low cost, doesn't have to be super sophisticated, depending on what your organization needs. So now let's look at the core steps to measure and design for outcomes, right? They're going to be the same steps essentially. So first, you're going to begin with the end in mind. What are we trying to achieve, right? Like what is it that we want for our members as a chamber? And then you're going to identify the core outcomes. So once you do that exercise of identifying what you want, and you're going to, you're going to lay out all the outcomes, you're going to realize that some of them are not necessarily important to the work that you want to do, right? Or what you want to achieve, rather, right? They're going to be important, but they won't be critical. Let me put it that way. So you want to really identify the critical outcomes that are core to both your mission, your members, and funders, right? If there are any funders that you all have, right? You want to make sure how those outcomes align with everyone. And then you're going to align your strategies and programs to achieve those outcomes. So if I know the outcomes that I want, I have to make sure that my programs, my workshops, my sessions, all of those things are aligning with what I want to achieve, right? And it also, and sometimes what happens is you have outcomes that are maybe oversized, what I like to say, right? There are outcomes that you maybe won't really be able to achieve for whatever reason. But if it is an outcome that you want, then you have to design for it, right? And if not, then we come back and we kind of bring the outcomes down to, I guess, more or less our capacity of what we're able to deliver. And then you're going to just identify the indicators, tools, sources, right? So what that means is, what are you going to use to determine that an outcome has been achieved, right? So what are those indicators? So you can properly measure that, and you can properly collect the right data. And that moves us into designing questionnaires to collect the right data. So data for the sake of data is just not always the best method. You definitely want to make sure you are collecting the right data, and that data won't always be outcome driven. It'll be some outputs, right? It'll be output data. It's going to be data about process, but it's definitely going to be data that should be the right data. And then you're going to assess your organizational capacity. So again, the staff, the systems, the tools, right, to achieve and measure your outcomes. Is this something that we can do? Are these outcomes appropriate for our chamber and our approach and our strategies, right? All right. And so now that we have our outcomes, right? We're managing, we're measuring outcomes. Now we're going to use those outcomes to inspire trust in your organization, right? And you're going to use that outcome data strategically. And what that means is we're going to think about exploratory versus explanatory data, which exploratory is kind of just like more or less like dashboards, right? You're looking at all your data, and you're kind of looking for different points that may stand out, right? But you're more or less just kind of exploring all the data. And then explanatory data is using that data to describe a specific point, right? To make a specific point that you're trying to make. And then you always want to remember that form follows function. So anytime you have data, you want to be clear on what you want someone to do with that data, right? What do you want them to know or learn, or what action do you want them to take when you share that data? So that's how you're going to design, essentially, right? Your form is going to follow the function of what you want to happen with that data. And then I recommend using a storytelling framework plus data storytelling, right? Storytelling is inherent to humans, right? And stories emotionally connect us, and they work. And so when you use a storytelling framework, maybe a value story or maybe a problem and solution story would be fitting, right? That framework combined with data storytelling, right? And data storytelling uses data to convey the message you want your audience to hear. And so this is a great graphic from Storytelling with Data, which is a leading organization in like data visualization. And so it's essentially is saying what I just mentioned, right? What's your context? What's the first thing you want someone to do with this data, right? And then you choose an effective visual. What's the right visual? What's the right way to display this data? And then you just eliminate the clutter, right? You try to remove as much as you can from a graph to reduce the cognitive load that people tend to experience when they look at quantitative data. And then you focus their attention. You focus their attention on what you want them to know and what you want them to see. And then you use that data to tell that story. Now, once you've done all those things, you should be telling a story with your data. And I just have some very kind of simple examples here. So for example, this is real data actually, and I created this, I provided the source there. But here are the top things considered for funding, right? And we can see impact just stands out, right? It's easy to tell, it's easy to see. And so it's also just kind of giving me a list of all the other items, right? I see the data points. And then if I wanted to maybe do a little bit of more data storytelling on this graph, I would do something like this, right? Because the message I want you to see is that impact is the most significant item for funding. So I kind of take away some of those data points. I highlight the point I want you to see. I don't even make you read what the graph is about. I tell you what I want you to get from that graph, right? That impact is the most significant item for funding. We should improve our outcomes, right? And this is around who you're communicating this data to. So if I was speaking to, let's say maybe a CEO who wanted to know, and I would say, this is the message I want, him or her to see. And another example is making sure you're choosing the right graph, which is what the previous visual just showed us, right? So these are the top indicators to evaluate impact according to funders. So as you can see, outcomes, right? 67%. It stands out, but is it more impactful if I show it to you like this, right? You really get an idea of just how different outcomes are, right? Compared to all the other ones. I've taken away the data points on the other ones because they're really, at this point, I want you to see outcomes and I want you to see just how much different it is from the next highest thing, right? And even with the wording, the language, the text that you put on the graph, I'm gonna help you see immediately what I want you to see from that data, right? And then lastly, we went through this journey of outputs versus outcomes and how we're going to measure it and why they're more important. And so inspiring trust in your organization is important, right? Why? Because it combats loss of trust capital. So independentsector.org, they run this survey every year, and I think they started in 2020. And what they're finding is just much like most institutions, people are losing trust even in nonprofits, right? There's this trust capital, this idea that because you are a nonprofit, I'm going to trust you. That is just kind of a dying sentiment, so to say, right? And that's what the data is showing here. In fact, their data show that people are now identified that they trust for-profits more than they do nonprofits. So inspiring trust in your organizations really help you kind of combat this loss of trust capital. And it also helps you secure more and ongoing support. So the more people trust you, whether it's the members, community, funders, you're going to secure more support and you're going to secure more ongoing support. And lastly, you're going to expand your impact. So if the work that we're doing is all about impact, right? And the more people can trust you, the more resources you secure, the greater the impact you're going to have, the greater the outcomes you're going to be able to have for your members. And so this is what the report kind of the recommendations for building trust, right? And I took this straight from their report. And as we can see, impact, right? Some of the things we touched on here today, demonstrating results, transparency, but this piece here, number 5, tell the story, communicate, clearly the impact of your work. So in summary, just to kind of sum up a little bit of what we looked at on each slide, right? Just to have a quick visual of the way all of these things kind of work together and how you go from, collecting and measuring outcomes to inspiring trust in your organization. And I'm happy to share this slide if anyone is interested, or the presentation if anyone is interested in it after the fact. All right. So now that leaves us sometimes for questions. I tried to be really short and sweet because I know you all have, other agenda items here today. So I definitely want to be respectful of that time, but I would love to hear just maybe any questions you all may have following that presentation.
Jessica, you were short and sweet and impactful. That's our word for the day. Do we have any questions? Any questions, Mr.?
I just have a comment. The information is just exceptional. So thank you so much for bringing it today. And as someone who's just started with the Chamber for 3 months now, I cannot tell you how helpful that is to focus. And we're planning a strategic session in July. So this immediately started to give me some of the framework that we need to be focused on, particularly around the outputs and the impact. And all of it, actually, building trust is key. And then the end result of having individuals support your organization. So it was short, it was concise, and it was exactly the methodology I think that we need to be looking at. And I know for me, it was very helpful. So thank you so much.
Oh, well, thank you. I definitely appreciate that. And I would like to bring up a point because you just made me think about it. So it's not that outputs are not important, right? It's just that outcomes, as we mentioned, right, they offer slightly richer data. And I think it's also around the type of organization. So some organizations are output focused organizations. So the best example would be like the food bank, right? When the food bank tells you they have served 5,000, families or 3,000 kids, or they provided 5 million pounds of food. Those outputs are incredibly valuable. However, they're also going to tell you some outcomes, right? Have they reduced food insecurity? Some of those elements. Also think of like Operation Smiles, right? The organization that, does the cleft surgeries. When they tell you 500 surgeries a year output, right? Activity data, that's powerful. So it's not in any way to discredit the role that outputs play, but it's to speak to the fact that most organizations are going to be outcome focused organizations. And if you are outcome focused organizations, you want to move that needle, right? You want to report on those outputs. You want to collect that data, but you then want to start measuring those outcomes, right? Looking at those outcomes. And more importantly, thinking beforehand what those outcomes are. So you don't have to wait for an outcome to show up, right? You can really identify what those outcomes are and make sure you're designing for those outcomes at the beginning.
Love that. Love that. I want to ask a question. I saw on the previous slide, maybe the one right before that, about inspiring trust.
Mhm.
We have a big um, issue sometimes in our organizations of inspiring trust. Many of our associations are short staffed, and people might have had a bad experience, etc. I saw that leveraging relationships with public figures or elected officials or something of that nature. I've always thought about an ambassador program. How do we get these major entrepreneurs that have received success from being part of our chamber? How do we get them to kind of share and share their story that they came to a TAC conference and they met a supplier diversity manager or procurement manager, and they got business from that. How do we get our members to become these ambassadors for us? Because again, I think it helps tell the story. But a lot of times we just can't get them to come back and share, or we don't know specifically what happened from those relationships.
Yeah, thank you for that, Courtney. Exactly. And to be, obviously there are going to be many other ways to inspire trust, right? And that includes obviously transparency and all of these other issues and things that are important to both your members and partners and funders, right? But in my opinion, as impact-driven organizations, that is the greatest thing that we're going to demonstrate, right? And that is impact. So when we think about that, when we think about the fact that this is the business that we're in, this is the work that we do, and this is what people expect from us, right? So how are we going to ensure that we can create that impact for our members?
Excellent. Excellent.
And thank you all so much. I see the comments. I absolutely can share it with Courtney. I have no problem with that. And please,
And actually, Jessica, it sounded like we may need to bring you to Dallas in September to do a workshop for us. What you think, Krista?
You took the words right out of my mouth. That was definitely going to be a text message that I fired off to you and Matt and Mr. President. So one of the things that I wanted to just jump on and say really quickly is we all, from a chamber perspective, but also as many of us are entrepreneurs, one of the things that I really appreciated about this content is something that can be applied personally as well, not just our businesses, but to our personal brand of who we are and what we choose to, how we choose to allow ourselves to be viewed and what we want to expect from ourselves. So I really appreciated this content. I'm like, yeah, let me take this back and go sit down and write down about my life outcomes and outputs and all of that. So I really appreciate it. It was really, really great content.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I would like to piggyback off of that it's something that I also encourage, like you say, for minority and women-owned businesses, specifically in social impact, because a lot of those businesses are generating impact that they're unaware of sometimes, right? And they're not really measuring those outcomes beyond kind of just the services they're delivering. So it's really an awesome approach that also works for businesses, especially those, like I said, that are creating social impact. And so many minority and women-owned businesses absolutely do that.
Yeah, and when I think about funding, when I think about even our entrepreneurs getting, lines of credits and things like that from their banks. When you think about CRA and you think about what banks are funding in this climate that we are in, our ability as entrepreneurs to tell our stories, our ability as chambers to tell our stories is really, really important to help position our organization. So that is a great point, ladies. Great point. Questions, comments? This is our opportunity. I'll let Jessica go back to work soon. So last chance.
And I am going to, while you all are doing that, I'm just going to drop this contact information here. I absolutely love LinkedIn, and I would love to connect with you all if you all are open to that. And just a little bit about how to reach me, LinkedIn, and the services that I offer with LC Resources. So feel free to reach out. And like I said, I would definitely share this presentation with Courtney.
Excellent. And I do want to just further just share that Jessica and I met when she was doing consulting services for organization that I'm a part of here in Houston. So if this is something that your organization, your chamber needs, I would encourage you all to reach out and get a quote for services. I think Madam Chair Greenford mentioned her strategic planning session coming up. Jessica, I don't know whether you do facilitation and things of that nature to help these organizations come up with their plan and what they're going to be focused on. But this is something that I think we have to pay for good services. So I would encourage the chambers to consider Jessica and her company. She is a member of Greater Houston Black Chamber here in the Houston area. So please consider her services as you look for your strategic planning, as we start to look at goals and the opportunity to make our chambers more impactful and tell our stories better.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for that, Courtney. And thank you all for the time this morning. I look forward to maybe hearing from some of you all, and feel free just with any additional questions that may come up later. I'm certainly open to working or answering those questions for you. So I'm going to give you all your time back if there's no other questions for me. All right, that sounds good. Well, I will talk to you soon, Courtney. I'll send you an email to follow up.
Really, really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you.